We are still baking, and thousands of suppliers that they have having to navigate that at this moment, as well as having some key announcements for us today. We have an exclusive conversation now with Marc Bitzer, Chairman and CEO of Whirlpool, of course, the world's leading kitchen laundry appliance company. You know them in your home. Marc, it's great to have you on the show. And amidst all this supply chain upheaval, you are setting commitments for the long term in terms of your production. You're really eyeing, what, net zero emissions by 2030 in terms of your operations? Talk us through it.
Caroline, first of all, thanks for having me on the show. Yes, we did announce that we will commit to net zero by 2030. I would, however, highlight this is not a isolated event. Actually, it falls in a tradition of many similar steps which we've done throughout our history. What most people probably don't know is we set up our Office for Environmental Affairs in 1969. That was long before its time. And actually, my predecessor committed as one of the first companies to the Kyoto Agreement. And of course, we're meeting or even beating the Paris Agreement. So committing to net zero by 2030 is, I would say, just part of our DNA.
All right, so some of this, of course, has to do with what you're doing on the corporate level for your own company. Some of this, of course, also has to do with redesigning the products here to also make them more efficient. As you start to go down that road, or I should say move further down the road with regards to the redesign of the products, how do you accomplish that in an environment where the supply chains are sort of a little bit out of whack here and even customer buying habits have really shifted over the past year or so?
Yeah, so let me maybe just split that answer in two pieces. First of all, our product commitment is also significant. We will further reduce our product consumption or energy consumption by 20%. Important thing is that comes on top of 60%, which we achieved since 2005. So to give you an analogy, if we would be a car manufacturer and our fleet consumption would have been, 23 miles per gallon in 2005, we would now be at 80 miles per gallon, and we're committing to more than 100 miles per gallon. Big difference, we don't consume fuel, it's energy. Now, to the second part, of course, the supply constraints are severe. And I think as much as we would want them to go away quickly, actually our perspective is that they will keep us busy for certainly 21, if not in parts into 22. So the way how we run our operations, how we run our business, our supply chain is anything but normal, and unfortunately will remain so for quite some time.
We've been hearing that some of those direct relationships with the suppliers have been that your chip crisis is perhaps less severe than others. How long do you expect that to last? When do you think there is a normalization?
Yeah, first of all, you need to put in context, it's not just the chip supplies. There was already a baseline, call it distressed supply chain, just coming with broader COVID measures. If you have a COVID-safe production, not only in our facilities, but also suppliers, it just essentially takes capacity away. So the moment you have a little glimpse, something happens. So we had already pre-chips, there were some stress throughout the entire supply chain. That has improved. Then we had the Texas winter storms, which I know you feel are long over. However, the rippling effect from this one, in particular on plastic supply in North America and beyond, have been severe. And on top of that, you have a microchip shortage, which frankly hit us probably later, and that's just because we have slightly different supply chain setup and, for example, compared to automotive companies. So we make longer-term volume commitments, but ultimately that's like hedging. So i.e., it protects you for some time, but at one point you will also face reality, and that was we see that pretty much in Q2 and Q3. So the chip shortage is significant. We hear the industry talking about things get better in Q3. I'm not so sure about it because we would expect some bullwhip effects going through the supply chain and people trying to rebuild inventory. So unfortunately, I would not be surprised if this is not over until end of Q4 or even beyond.
Marc, therefore, you've been nimble. You've been changing up your production lines. You've been trying to look at ways to navigate this, and swiftly. How are you still continue to do that? What are the knock-on effects? And are price rises inevitable in that respect?
Yeah, so first of all, the supply chain is, as you said, it's pretty much upside down. To put it in the most simple terms, typically, like many other industrial companies, we basically have a pull system. We have orders or order forecast and produce accordingly. When you have these kind of constraints, if you just have the orders running against the system, you just have chaos. So we basically turn it around and basically have a constraint-driven production, i.e., We look at what do we have available today, and that's pretty much what we produce, which, believe me, is anything but efficient or normal, but that's how you have to run it right now. So the second part is on the prices, and that's probably more related to the broader cost inflation, which we see across the board. It's steel, it's plastic, it's logistic cost, labor costs start increasing. So I know there's talk or maybe hope for this is a temporary blip. We do see it elevated for a sustained period. And therefore, we announced that in our earnings call, we have started to raise prices across the world. We've done that already in January. We had some additional price increases in March or April, because that's the only way how you can right now mitigate the significant cost inflation.
We're seeing that. It'll be interesting whether customers actually uptake that. I am curious about the recent earnings you had. You had phenomenal growth, as a lot of companies in your space did. There's, of course, some concern about a pull forward here and whether you can maintain sort of double-digit percentage growth above 20%. Assuming you can't do that, and right now analyst expectations seem to be that that can't be sustained, how do you manage expectations in a way that these last couple of quarters really aren't going to be reflective of what Whirlpool is going to be able to deliver longer term?
Yeah, actually, let me maybe start with the second part of your question. We had now 4 all-time record earning years in a row. So this is not a one-time wonder. It's not a COVID blip. It's 4 years in a row. So I would argue it's a very different Whirlpool than before. And even at the worst time, Q2 last year, we had pretty solid margins. So I don't think it's just a one-time quarter or blip. More importantly, and let me maybe just talk about the pull forward, which I know is a term many people outside use of the analysts. I'm not quite sure it describes consumer behavior in an adequate way. And what I mean by that, because it basically implies that an appliance lifetime is defined by years, as if there would be a fixed number of years. You have to think about appliance lifetime more in terms of usage or cycles you get or miles you get out of this one. So what we're seeing right now with people staying at home is essentially accelerated and more intense use, i.e. they put more miles or more cycles on the appliance. So it's not a pull forward, it's more accelerated use, which ultimately drives demand over many years. And even going forward, if you listen to all the discussions about remote working, most office workers will see themselves probably on average 1 or 2 days more at home than in the past. That again drives increased appliance usage and also higher willingness to spend at the home. So we're actually very bullish on the consumer demand going forward. This is certainly not a one-year wonder. I would argue it has sustained strong demand parameters on many fronts, on top of the housing market, which we also see continue to see very bullish.
Finally here, we are having a conversation in this country about taxes and on higher corporate taxes as you're trying to run a company. What would be the impact on you? And then, of course, higher capital gains taxes, how that would impact your shareholders. What are your thoughts on taxes? Yeah,
so first of all, as you know, it's not all details of a tax plans have been communicated or have been laid out, and particularly when it comes to corporate tax, a lot of the elements sit in the fine print. So it's kind of, I don't want to speculate about all the details. Mm-hmm. Having said all that, if you look back the last couple of years, we had last year tax rate of 26% effective tax rate. Since the tax reforms, we had on average 29%. That is above what is the statutory tax rate. It's above what the G7 average tax rates or OECD averages. So it certainly shows we pay our fair share of taxes, and frankly, we consider the corporate responsibility to do so. Now, specifically on what changes might mean for us, I would like to point out when the previous tax plans happened in 2017, we were not one of the major beneficiaries. So as such, I wouldn't expect a huge impact on us. But again, a lot needs to be seen once we see the details of a tax plan.